Hi, everyone. This is Ray Luskin, your creative activist. And I'm so excited today to have a wonderful person with us, Heidi Basch-Harod. She is the executive director of Women's Voices Now. And we had the pleasure of speaking to her a few years ago. But there's been some exciting and wonderful changes that have happened in her organization. And I want to share them with you because this conference, Women Who Dare, is about women who are making an impact in art, in health, and social change. And Heidi is covering many of those grounds with her wonderful work. She won an Emmy this year. So Heidi, welcome. I'm so happy you're here today.
Thank you, Ray. I'm so glad to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure. I'd love for you to talk about what you're doing right now and the work you're doing with young girls. And I think it's really important how you're working with them.
Sure. So I'm the executive director of Women's Voices Now, as you mentioned. And at Women's Voices Now, we use film to drive positive change that advances women's and girls' rights globally. And we do that through our three main pillars, our three main programs, which is our online film festival, which is supporting emerging filmmakers from all over the world who are using their skills and their talents to tell the stories that we don't usually hear about women and girls. We focus on emerging women filmmakers, and that doesn't mean that you're a young filmmaker. It means you can be 70 years old and finally get around to making that film you'd always wanted to make all your life. So we're trying to support those voices that we don't usually hear, that don't usually get the opportunities that others, of different age groups or genders are getting. And of course, we're trying to shine a light on international women's issues to show sort of while we may be from different places and at different stages in our lives, there's usually something common about being a woman in that experience, both positive and negative, and trying to bring people together around the common shared experiences. And then we have our Girls Voices Now program, which
Why don't you talk? I just want to mention to people that this is what they got their Emmy for this year, right? This is
for Girls Voices Now, for the next program that I'm about to
okay,
talk
good.
about.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'd love for you to talk about it because we were supposed to have one of the young women with us today, but it didn't work out. And it's a wonderful story, and she's been doing a lot of wonderful work as a director and telling her story. So go ahead, go ahead.
Sure. So Girls Voices Now is our youth development program, and we're primarily working with youth ages 14 to 18, girls and femme identifying individuals who are from the Los Angeles County area. The past 2 summers, of course, we've done it virtually to stay safe from COVID. And over 5 weeks, these girls learn filmmaking skills from start to finish, like storyboarding and cooperation, and then of course, lighting, editing, sound, all of the elements that go into filmmaking about something that they care about, whether it's a personal issue, a community issue, a global issue. And at the end of the summer, they have a short social change documentary to show for it, as well as a really intensive experience in confidence building and community creating and mentorship. And then we try to carry on with them throughout the year in whatever possible way we can. We're a pretty small organization, so we have a few workshops during the year, holiday get-together, stuff like that.
Can I ask who is doing the training for you?
Sure. So in the summer portion of things, we have a media instructor. For the past 2 summers, it's been the person's name is Brooke Siebold. They're a very accomplished filmmaker, always focusing on, whether it's reproductive rights, other kinds of women's stories. And they have done a really incredible job of taking on the virtual version of this program. So there's the media instructor, that's been Brooke, and we also have a sort of a media program instructor assistant, this incredible filmmaker Ale from Mexico City. She's been with us the past 2 summers. So those are the 2 main people that work with the girls every day from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then beyond. And then as well, we have our programs director who also steps in to provide support and to mentorship and to connect with the girls as well. And then the girls break into production teams, about 5 a summer. We try to take on 20 girls a summer, and each production team gets a media chaperone. So that person is responsible for helping the girls ideate and bring their film idea into an actual film, also teaching them, like interview protocols and sort of banners if you were to go into someone's home and interview them in non-COVID times, and just help them apply what they've learned in the main classroom to their individual film project. And
That's
then we bring in
fabulous.
guest speakers as well, different women from different walks of life, who are in the film industry or the self-care industry, just exposing them to different ways of being who you are authentically is the idea.
Right, right. I mean, the story that had got me was the one about the girl with the, with the scarf, and it's like she came from Bangladesh, and that was who we were hoping to have with us today. And she was talking about how she learned to speak English by watching Disney Channel. I mean, I found that just fascinating, but just coming in and having to survive it in this new world. I think the stories are powerful. You had one with somebody who I watched earlier too, and it's like some of the stories just grab your heart, and they're not very long. They're like 6 minutes. And so I think that, why don't you tell people how they can get on your mailing list and find out more so that you have that information up?
Sure. Yeah. So Women's Voices Now is womensvoicesnow.org. And we have a sign up button at the top and at the bottom of the website where you can get onto our newsletter. And we communicate with our global community that way once a month, usually. And as well, of course, we're on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, where we're always posting interesting content to keep people engaged and informed about different women in the world who are making waves, different developments in films that have to do with women, and of course, keeping people updated on our programs and events. Yes.
Okay, you said there's a third group that you wanted to talk about.
So, and our third program is our online film collection. So that is a free resource to anyone anywhere in the world. As long as you have internet connection, you have access to over 200 women's rights based films in about 44 languages, from over 65 countries. And we have categorized them in over like 20 topics or something like this. So it's an incredible resource to teachers, to activists, to government stakeholders, really anyone who wants to take a deeper look into what women and girls are facing all over the world. Again, struggles and triumph. It's not just a depressing experience,
Right.
just to learn deeper through the medium of film about something you might not have come across otherwise.
So what prompted you to get into this? What was your inspiration?
So my inspiration, let's see. Well, from a very young age, I definitely wanted to make a difference in the world and make it a better place. And that very much came from my learning at a young age, my grandfather's story of surviving the Holocaust. That touched me very deeply. And then basically throughout my teenage years and then my college years, I always came back to women, and that how when you see communities and societies where women are activated, and healthy, thriving members of societies, usually the society is healthier and more thriving. And where that is not the case, you don't see such positive developments. And there's actually the first time I really remember realizing this was I was a undergrad at UC Berkeley, and the woman who founded an organization called Tibetan Nuns Project came in to a classroom and talked about how the Tibetans who basically, have been, invaded by the Chinese for decades and decades, and have been denied their own language and the practicing of their religion and their culture, that as members of the Tibetan community were fleeing Tibet and going into India, that there was this realization that if the nuns, Tibetan nuns, because they're a Buddhist society and they have nuns and monks, if the nuns weren't learning Tibetan and if the nuns weren't learning the Buddhist philosophy, then all this culture, religion, language, and way of life was going to be lost because so many monks were killed in Tibet. So the idea was to rehabilitate these women and teach them what nuns had historically never been taught about becoming Buddhist philosophers, essentially. And the message I got was women are an untapped resource. And that is all over the world, whether you're in the Middle East, whether you're in North America, whether you're in wherever else there are human beings, that women have so much potential, so much to offer, and are quite often not being allowed to fulfill their potential. And we all lose out when that's the case.
Right. Well, and unfortunately, I do believe it's still the same. You're talking about when you were an undergrad, but now years later, I still feel that women are untapped resources, around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're trying to undo something that's been going on for 5,000 years. So it's going to take a little bit longer than 100 years that we've been, I would say, like actively working toward this. Yes.
Okay. So what would you say, to somebody who's listening today that I want to make a difference? Well, how would you start them in that process? What would you say to them?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say to them is I'd ask a few questions about what are things that they're passionate about, what are things that they care about in the world, what are places and people that interest them, and then I would probably direct them to our film collection and have them watch a couple films, and see if there was a way to get involved locally, whether it's at a women's shelter or writing letters about a piece of legislation that needs to go through to support women to the proper offices. That's what I would do basically, because there's something about the power of film to motivate us and to sort of put us in the shoes of someone else and feel like, well, what if no one did something on my behalf, or look what that person did accomplish, I can do this too. So really film sort of stirs up our empathy, and from the empathy that we feel, we are quite often motivated to take action that could be better for the world.
I love the way you said that, because I feel that way about the arts in general.
Yes.
It's an educational tool. If we use it that way, it creates awareness, and it touches us in a way that we may not have heard something before, because we see something or we hear words that, like, oh, that they said that, I never heard that before, even though we heard it a million times. We then are able to move beyond our patterns of thought, because we have to create new neural pathways if we're going to do anything,
That's
and
right.
change hearts and minds.
Yes.
Because I think that's what I was hoping to do with this conference, is to have changed hearts and minds and let people hear about different topics that they wouldn't necessarily hear about. And some of them are about, just, drumming, the arts, theater, the power of theater, each one, shaman telling stories. So there's so many different ways to tell a story. And you're a storyteller, you're also an author. So why don't you tell us about how, you're an author, what that means to you, and the power of story, and how would you tell someone to craft a story? I believe in the hero's journey, and sort of that arc. And I think whether you're writing a story or writing a screenplay, I think you have to have that.
Sure. Yes. Okay. So for me, so as an author, I write primarily, I would say almost like academic articles that, right. So yes, I do write poetry. I've been working on a short story for more than 10 years. It'll probably never see the light of day. No problem. For me, the way writing for me is sort of as a pathway to seeking truth. I do research. I like to ask a few questions and find out as much as I can about that topic or that issue, see what everyone is saying about that, and sort of where I come out at the end of having all of that information. And I think that that it's very powerful, because it turns out that maybe some of the stories or some of the things that I want to find out, not too many people know about or are interested in, but if they take the time to read it, they'll actually find that they have a great interest in what I'm writing about, or that it actually applies to their life, even though it's about a woman across the world finding her power. And maybe they're not in the exact same situation, but just like the film, it's about, like, it's my medium of allowing some other people to walk in someone else's shoes as well. So I find that for me, that's the best way to express myself. And I actually do wonder though, maybe if one day I'll be able to work on a film, but that hasn't come to my table just yet.
Yeah, well, you've produced films, well, you
Correct.
might, but
Yes.
you'll
Yes.
write that script. There is going to be some story that you run across that you're the only person who can tell it.
It could
You
be.
know,
It could
and,
be.
and
Yes.
it may go back to your grandfather in the Holocaust and looking at something in a new way. One of the women I've been working with, she wrote a book during COVID. I forgot the name of it. The group in Germany that's laying stones where people of Jewish, have been killed. And I forgot the name, but she wrote a book about it. Her family, and then they just she rewrote the last chapter because she went to just go for some laying of stones. And so it's a great story. It wasn't something I had ever even heard of until we started to talk. And so those are the things that, like, wow, look at that. Not, and the idea that, oh, not every German was a Nazi and a Jewish hater. There were other people who were caring and compassionate. She wanted to tell that story, so. And I think there are different ways to do that. I mean, whether it's in a screen, I mean, for me, I'm such a visual person. It's really, I love film, it's sort of just like, it captures me.
Yes, takes you away. And I think, also what's so important about, these conversations about talking about creativity and art and music and film as vehicles for change is, we so need beauty in our lives, right? We need to be awed, and we need to be reminded of the awe that there is, looking at flowers and trees and the sky, and how much that kind of gives us perspective and opportunities for gratitude of our experiences as human beings. And I think all of these modalities give us, remind us of that.
Right. And whatever faith looks like to you, whatever your God of your, ancestors or whatever it is, there it is. And for me, it is in nature. I take photographs almost every day. I'm outside and I'm walking, and, right before this, I ran outside for 10 minutes just to get out. Now that, there's one patch of blue sky and now it's sunny, and it's like and I kept saying, thank you, God. For me, that's like, oh,
Absolutely.
we're open to possibilities. That one little blue sky and now it's sunny. I also think, I don't think people realize, and for me, one of my core values is the appreciation of beauty and sharing beauty. And I don't think people think of that, and it is, for me, it is something that's really important, and it's part of my service to myself, my family, and the community, because like you said, we need wonder and joy. We need that in our lives to give us hope, instead of the desperate times that we've been living in.
Right, exactly. It's really important. Absolutely. And life goes on. We need to be reminded of that too.
Right. Life goes on. So what are some of the things in the works for you?
So currently our film festival with Women's Voices Now, our film festival is open for submissions. So we are actively recruiting films from all over the world to view and to judge for cash prizes come the spring. And we'll have our event on March 12th, 2022. And that will be an online event, and we'll do it at a reasonable time for our friends in Europe and other places of the world. So we're working on that. And other things I cannot quite yet talk about because we've got to figure out how to get them done.
Okay, I was going to ask you about funding,
Yeah.
and that's a big part of whatever, when you have a nonprofit and you're doing this work, how do you get funding? Who's going to pay for the prizes and just all the pieces and the mentors? And
so that's always a great challenge. And actually, we have something really exciting that has happened this winter, which is that one incredibly generous donor has pledged $25,000 for our end of the year campaign. And so our campaign is all of the month of November, and so dollars will be matched 1-for-1 up to $25,000. So this year that is quite a lot of the efforts are going into just doubling down on our outreach and fundraising and getting people to be as excited about what we're trying to do and what we're doing as we are. And the challenge always is we have so much we want to do, and we need to not only continue our programs but expand them. So that is a major part of my attention and work.
Right.
Next 6 weeks. Yes.
So, okay. So besides writing poetry, what other things, do you consider creative that you do in your life? I know you have kids and you play with them all the time. So,
sure. Yeah.
But, I think people need to hear about what is creativity, because not everybody is an artist. It is the way you parent. It is the way you garden. It's the way you cook, or solve a problem. And so I also like to believe that part of my mission is to share that idea that creativity is more than being an artist.
Yeah, I love this question. So the thing that came to my mind as you were speaking and giving examples was that I think I try to show my creativity every day in my home by how I arrange things, right? Like I need things to look a certain way with a plant or like a certain picture or like an artifact from my travels. Like I'd like to be surrounded by things that I like to look at, right? And it's not that it's expensive, it's just, it's meaningful to me, it's beautiful to me, and making sure that I know that the space is not static, that it changes with the season. So maybe it's like taking down the artwork of the kids from, 2 months ago and replacing it with just what came from home, or, like having fruits on outside in the open for people to see in a bowl that's beautiful to me. So just like really interacting with the space that I live in, I think that's how I can express my creativity every day. It's not always perfect because I live with, 3 children and a husband, and they don't have the same aesthetic as me, let's say, right?
Yeah.
So I can get frustrated by the pickup of stuff that has to happen, but like there are a few spaces in my home that I have domain
for your own. Yes.
Yeah, or I try anyway.
You try.
So,
anyway.
but that's it. Is what being conscientious and mindful of the space I'm inhabiting and making sure that there's beauty in it. That's I think daily I can do that creatively. Yeah.
I love that, because that's just a simple thing anybody can adopt. It's like if you just go and pick up a piece of fruit or even a leaf. We have changing seasons right now, so you go collect some leaves and just put them out, and it's like, wow, look at that, it changed it. But you're conscious also. I think part of it is we also, going back to our conversation about beauty, you have to look for beauty. Yeah. Sometimes you really have to say, oh my God, that is beautiful. And it could be the 5 shades of green you saw on the grass today, so there is that. I think we have to look for gratitude in life, because I think that makes us healthier and happier people ultimately.
No, 100,000%. I couldn't agree with that statement more.
Okay. Do you have a favorite book about creativity, or a favorite poet that you like to quote, or anything like that?
So it's interesting. I would not say I have a favorite book, but I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I have 2 journal type books that I keep, that I've kept since my teenage years, where anytime I come across something that's moving to me, I actually write it down in a book. So I actually have a collection of quotes or passages, postcards, magazine cutouts, and like that's just an ongoing project of mine, because again, I need to have that beauty accessible to me. So that's something that I've compiled. So there's poems and poems from people, all kinds of different backgrounds, and passages from books I read, even 2 sentences from a book that have really moved me. I always take the time to note them, so
I love that. That's a great idea for people. I know I've collected a lot of quotes, and I have pages of them, and I put them in a notebook.
Yes.
And I look at them because that's what inspires me, all the time. And so that, there are so many ways that, whether it's an idea journal, like you're talking about, or just even, I used to, what I call the visual diary. If, when you used to have a million magazines and things like that, and cards, I would cut those out or rip them out and just tape them in a book, because those images inspired me all the time. So there's so many ways to be inspired. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So anything you'd like to add? Any final thoughts?
No, I think, it is a shame that Maren couldn't join us today. I would actually inspire and invite everyone to watch the film Under the Scarf that did win an Emmy this summer, from our Girls Voices Now youth program. As you were talking about, Ray, it's about Maren. She was 16 years old, talking about her experience of trying to become American, but finding, like, do I want to become American? What do I want to hang on from my Bangladeshi side? And seeing America through that lens of being a new immigrant, of being a teenager, of being a girl. It's a very powerful film. It's very moving. It is about 6.5 minutes. It can be found in our film collection. And it'd be worth, taking the time to watch that. That's what I would want to share with everyone.
It is. And what's interesting is she has used the experience with you and gone on to do other things with film. So, I think that what you've done by mentoring and inspiring her is she's going to add a voice wherever she goes and whatever she does in her studies. And it's really, impressive. And I think that's, we as mentors, how do you, I'm going to ask you one more question since we're getting on the topic of mentoring. What do you think are some of the most important conversations as a mentor you can have with someone?
So what I wanted to say about with Maren, though, is that while the organization and the people in it can mentor her, it's really her own strength and her own grit and determination that gets her where she is and where she's going. It's not about what we're giving to her per se. I think the job of the mentor is to really listen deeply and to help the mentee see themselves as as their best, right? Like, hopefully you have like a deep caring for someone that you're mentoring for. And I would want all of the girls that I work with to see themselves how I see them, right?
Right, right. You want them to step into their brilliance, their power, their purpose, and know they are more than enough.
Yes.
I think that's too often we go around in our head. I'm a fraud. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough, whatever it is. And I think that's an important lesson. And I think coming from the women who, like us, who have been around the block a few times, if we can impart that to them and encourage them and empower them to take those steps, I think that we have made a difference every single day.
Yeah. And when they show up and are that, they also remind us, because I don't know about you, but no matter how many times around the block, I always need to be reminded of my greatness too, because I don't see it all the time. And they quite often step up to that and show us back, that remind us that we need to keep up with ourselves too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I immersed myself in 3 days of learning over the weekend in a conference about, dream building and all the things that I care about, and about, my vision for going forward. And it was like, oh, I just needed that support. We all need support. We all need someone to dream with us, to say, hey, I see it for you. I see who you are, who you're becoming. And and I love it.
Yeah,
So I think
exactly.
that's really what I love to do. When I have these conversations, when I'm mentoring people.
Yes. Yeah. It's
Well,
important to have each other's back.
right, right. So thank you so much, Heidi. I really appreciate you
Pleasure,
being
Ray.
here. And one of my favorite quotes is, never underestimate the ability of a small group of committed individuals to change the world, by Margaret Mead. So we're going to end with that quote today. And thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. Take care.
Wait a minute.